The streets of Moscow had a way of swallowing men whole. And in the gray winter of the early 1980s, those shadows didn't just hide secrets. They hid a man who was single-handedly dismantling an empire from the inside. Imagine walking a tightrope over an abyss every single day. One wrong step, one micro-expression out of place, and you aren't just fired. You are erased. This isn't a Hollywood thriller. This is the reality of Oleg Gordievsky, the Kremlin's greatest traitor. And as we peel back the layers of this story, you will realize that the tradecraft used back then is the direct ancestor of the digital warfare we see today. From human firewalls to the original backdoors, this is a cybercrime documentary in the making. Long before the first line of code ever threatened a nation, I am the digital Sleuth. And today we are declassifying the file on the spy who saved the world from nuclear winter. But before we dive into the belly of the beast, let me ask you this. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these failed spy files travel. If stories of high-stakes deception keep you hooked, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Because the next file we open goes even deeper into the world of espionage disasters. Oleg Gordievsky wasn't just a recruit in the Soviet security machine. He was its DNA. Born into the service. His father was an officer for Stalin's NKVD, the brutal predecessor to the KGB. At the dinner table, while other kids learned manners, Oleg learned the language of secrecy, vigilance, and absolute loyalty to the party. By the 1950 seconds, Oleg understood a grim reality. Survival meant silence. It was an era of purges, where a whisper of dissent resulted in a knock at the door in the middle of the night. This environment turned him into a master of compartmentalization. In the tech world, we call this sandboxing, keeping dangerous processes isolated so they can't infect the rest of the system. Oleg was the ultimate sandbox. His sharp mind and flair for languages led him to the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, a breeding ground for the Soviet elite. He was being programmed to be a perfect tool for the USSR. And by the early 60 seconds, his recruitment into the KGB was inevitable. He had the pedigree, the skills, and the temperament. But then he was posted to Copenhagen, and for the first time Oleg tasted Western air, jazz, uncensored books, and real political debate. It was a system shock. And then came 1968, the Prague Spring. Soviet tanks crushed the dream of socialism with a human face. Looking at the images of soldiers patrolling streets, Oleg realized he wasn't serving a noble cause. He was serving a tyranny. The firewall had a breach. The trusted system of the KGB now had an internal vulnerability. By the early 70 seconds back in Copenhagen, Oleg's disillusionment was complete. Mikosi, the British intelligence service, was watching. They were looking for cracks in the armor. They didn't use a brute force attack to recruit him. They used social engineering. Subtle encounters, polite conversations, testing his reactions. When Oleg finally crossed the line, he became the ultimate logic bomb inside the KGB. He wasn't doing it for money or revenge. He was driven by belief. He wasn't betraying Russia. He was trying to save it. And the tradecraft he used was the analog version of modern encryption. Brush passes on crowded streets were his packets of data. Chalk marks on lampposts were his connection signals. Dead drops in parks were his hidden servers. But the psychological toll was massive. Imagine running a high-resource program on a computer with a failing cooling system. By day, he was the model KGB officer. By night, he was feeding MI6 everything. He was a master of the man-in-the-middle attack, intercepting communication between the Kremlin and its agents, and relaying it to London. He knew exactly what the KGB looked for because he was the one trained to find people like him. It was the ultimate game of cat and mouse, played in the dark, where the prize was a bullet to the back of the head. In 1982, the stakes reached a fever pitch. Oleg was posted to the Soviet embassy in London. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a front-row seat to the end of the world. Tensions were at a breaking point. Ronald Reagan had called the USSR the evil empire. NATO was deploying missiles, and the Kremlin, they were spiraling into a collective system crash of paranoia. They launched Operation RYN, a massive intelligence effort to detect signs of a surprise Western nuclear strike. The Soviet leadership actually believed a first strike was coming. This wasn't a bluff. It was a terrifying miscalculation. In cybersecurity, we call this a false positive on a massive scale. If the Soviets saw a glitch, they might trigger a global delete button. Oleg funneled this intelligence to MI6. When Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan saw the reports, they were stunned. They realized the Soviets weren't acting out of aggression, but out of absolute dread. This intel allowed the West to adjust their protocols. They softened their rhetoric and avoided provocative maneuvers. Oleg Gordievsky didn't just provide names. He provided the source code of the Kremlin's fear. He gave the West the decryption key to avoid a nuclear war. He was now the acting resident, the head of the KGB's London station. He was at the highest level of user access possible, all while being controlled by the British. But you can only bypass security for so long before the logs are checked. Moscow began to notice that their operations were being compromised with surgical precision. The intrusion detection system was triggered. The summons to Moscow arrived like a critical error message. Oleg knew a recall usually meant one of two things: a promotion or a firing squad. He flew back, and the moment he touched down, he felt the change. His apartment had been scanned. His things moved ever so slightly. His phones were tapped. The debriefings weren't polite conversations. They were brute force interrogations. They even drugged him with a truth serum, the 80-Sekunde version of a keylogger, trying to get him to slip up. But his data integrity held. He played the part of the loyal officer even while his mind was screaming. He knew he had to trigger Operation PIMLICO, his emergency exfiltration plan. The signal was as low-tech as it gets. Appearing at a specific corner, carrying a Safeway plastic bag. To the KGB shadows, it was just a man with groceries. To MI6, it was a rescue request. The escape was a masterpiece of stealth. Smuggled into the trunk of a British diplomatic car, Oleg was driven toward the Finnish border. They used the ultimate admin privilege: diplomatic immunity. At the border, the car was searched. KGB guards, dogs, the whole works. One guard even leaned on the trunk where Oleg was hiding. But the firewall held. The car crossed into Finland, and the mole had successfully exported himself. Oleg Gordievsky's story is a testament to the fact that the greatest threats and the greatest defenses are often internal. Today, we don't have to worry about KGB colonels in trunks, but we do have to worry about digital moles. As a cybercrime documentary host, I see these patterns every day: financial fraud, massive phishing attacks, and data breaches all rely on the same things Oleg used: trust, deception, and the exploitation of user error. So, how do you protect your own embassy? Here is the Digital Sleuth's protocol. First, trust but verify. Always check the source code of an email. If a link looks suspicious, it is a trap. Second, use multi-factor authentication. This is like having a double agent working for you. Even if they get your password, they can't get past the second barrier. Third, update your firmware. Just as the KGB's old methods eventually failed against modern tradecraft, your old software will fail against new exploits. Patch your systems, and finally, encryption is key. Protect your data like it is a declassified file. Use a VPN and encrypted messaging apps to keep your cables private. Oleg Gordievsky eventually settled in England, living under a different name, forever a ghost to the nation that birthed him. He was sentenced to death in absentia, a permanent ban from the land of his fathers, but his legacy remains. He proved that one person armed with the right information can change the flow of history. In the digital age, information is the new nuclear payload. Stay vigilant, stay secure, and remember, in the world of the internet, someone is always watching the logs. I am the Digital Sleuth. If you found this file valuable, leave a like and share it with your network. Let's keep the digital world a little safer, one story at a time. Until the next declassification, stay in the light.